Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another Teacher Joseph podcast. Today's phrase is going bananas, and that's when we talk about someone who's getting very, very angry. So, my neighbor, she knocked on my door last night and she was going bananas. Another way you can describe this in British English is she was going off on one. Going off on one. My neighbor was really going off on one. She was really going bananas. Now, let me just give you a few examples of these phrases. So I decided to quit medical school to become a clown. When I told my mother, she went bananas. When I told my boss at work that I'll be playing the saxophone while I'm working from now on, he really went off on one. I'm worried that if I tell my father that I'm quitting medical school to become a comedian, he will go off on one. My mother went absolutely bananas when she heard that I was quitting university in order to pursue a career as an artist. Okay, those are just some examples. So let me give you the background. My neighbor was very, very angry because there's an empty apartment in our block. There's only 4 apartments in our block. We have small apartment blocks here. But she'd heard that it was being reserved for someone that's homeless. Now, let me just explain a little bit about UK culture on this. First of all, we don't keep areas only for people with problems, okay? So it's not like, for example, a homeless person will be placed in an area with homeless people. You can find homeless people everywhere. And also, because they're homeless, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad people. But my neighbor, she thinks that because they're homeless, they may be drug addicts, or maybe they will be alcoholics, or maybe they will have antisocial behavior. Now, I have to say that in the northern part of the UK, that is completely possible. We do have a lot of people who live around us with those kinds of problems, okay? The northern part of the UK is the most impoverished. The government is trying to fix that, and it's not as bad as it used to be. In the 1990s, there was a culture of antisocial behavior. There still is in different areas and parts of my town, but there's a possibility when a new neighbor moves in, they might have problems or they might not. So my neighbor has heard that the person who's going to get the empty apartment next door is someone who's homeless. Now, in my eyes, I'm thinking, oh, a homeless person, great. I hope it's an immigrant, or I hope it's someone from another country. And then I can learn all about their delicious food, and they'll be friendly because British people aren't. And I can talk to them and help them with their English. Maybe it'll be a Ukrainian, maybe it'll be an Iranian, and I can practice my Farsi. Maybe it'll be a Spanish person, and I can practice my Spanish. But my neighbor, on the other hand, sees it in a negative way. She's thinking, oh, a homeless person, so that means antisocial behavior, drugs, and alcohol. And I'm thinking, no, homeless could mean a wonderful chance to help somebody with English, to learn more about their culture, to open my mind. So you can see my neighbor and I are looking at the same thing from 2 completely different angles. So my neighbor was on my doorstep going absolutely bananas about the possibility that this house or apartment is going to be allocated to someone homeless. But I was trying to make the point that not all homeless people are bad people, you know, that there's a very strong possibility that the person might be fine, you know. But sadly, my neighbor wasn't able to catch that. And when I mentioned the word immigrant, she looked at me, and I'm thinking, what's she going to say here? Because she knows that I'm living with a Venezuelan. So is she really going to say that she doesn't want immigrants living here? And so she kind of like looked over my shoulder and she saw my family members staring at her. And she said, "Oh, of course, if it's an immigrant, I don't mind, you know. But I'm just worried that it's going to be some kind of junkie or drug addict." And I said to her, "Well, you know, it might not be that bad. There's a really good chance here that it's going to be someone from a culture that you don't know. And even if it is someone who's homeless, you know, it could be a woman who's perhaps been abused by her husband, someone who maybe needs some support and love." But she had it in her mind that the word homeless meant drugs, alcohol, and antisocial behavior. So she rang her landlord and she told the landlord, "If you put someone homeless in here, you'll have to give me a new apartment. I've been here 16 years. I don't want to live next to someone who's homeless." So she obviously was not really understanding the process or what the word homeless means, you know. But next time I'm talking to her, I'll just have to again mention a few definitions of what a homeless person could be: an immigrant, a battered woman, someone from a marriage that didn't work out. But I think she's just worried that it's going to be some of the local crazy people that maybe she's seen growing up, because I think she's grown up around here. And that's the story of my neighbor going bananas. Let me just give you some background to that story. You might be interested. In the UK, as you know, we used to be a very industrial country. Up until the time of Margaret Thatcher, we had factories everywhere. And some of our villages and towns were created because of factories which existed since the 19th century. For example, the steelworks, the car factories. These industries employed many, many people. And so in response to that, the government built a lot of houses. And so in these areas, the government tends to be our landlord. It's something of our history. For example, where I'm living, they used to build the Talbot cars. So the government built loads of houses for those employees to live in. Now, that factory has long gone, okay? But the government still own the houses. So it's quite easy for us to access government housing. And we like it because it's cheap. Nobody else wants it, because in the private sector, to buy a house is an investment. But also, if you're a first-time buyer, you can buy a house from the government, and it tends to be cheaper because the government is trying to get rid of its stock. It keeps reducing it. But they do keep some houses instead of selling them. And where I'm living right now, on a busy main road, half of it is owned by the government and half of it is private. So people who've rented from the government said, "Okay, you've rented this for a while, do you want to buy it?" So people have bought it. Now, there's a good thing and a bad thing about living in an area with government housing. First of all, the government have a responsibility to make sure everyone's housed. So if someone comes along with social problems like alcoholism or drug addiction or broken homes or whatever, then the government have to house them. So that means that it could be your new neighbor, all right? Because I don't think the government particularly cares who else is in an apartment block. They'll just put somebody in it who needs a home, which is okay. That's not a bad thing. So it's a bit of a risk if you live in a council area, because depending on who the neighbors are, you might find that you have some problems. Now, just to elaborate on that, I live in a very diverse street. Okay, so I can see if I look out my window, there's black people walking up and down, there's Arabs, there's clearly refugees, there's immigrants, and they're all living in government housing. Okay, for me, that's a wonderful opportunity to get to know different cultures. But a lot of people really don't like that, you know? So when my neighbor was telling me, oh, I don't want a homeless person, she was meaning, I think, that she hopes that the government isn't going to put into that apartment someone with antisocial behavior. And the way she described this, unfortunately, made her sound like a complete racist. But I think when you live in a small area and you have a small mind and you've never left, you don't really see the benefits, you know, the bigger picture of how you can help people. I mean, I've lived in places in the world which have been, well, downright dangerous. South America, for example. So for me, I'm just really glad to be living in an apartment which is quiet and happy. If I have antisocial neighbors, well, I'll say hello to them. I'll probably try to ignore them, but I don't see it as a huge problem. But my neighbors reacting differently. So there we are, going bananas, going off on one. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this. Let's talk again soon. See you. Bye.